Hey, if you're a fan of the band Journey, I think you'll get a huge kick out of this video today. What I did is I found a newspaper article that was put out in December 3rd of 1981. So this would have been the year that the album Escape came out. And this is a little review of the band, and it's really interesting reading what people had to say at the time when these big things were happening in pop culture and in music that at the time we didn't realize how big they were. So this would have been the time when Escape, the album Escape, came out. And of course, that album ended up being probably for Journey their touchstone, like their biggest. Don't Stop Believin' was on there, Open Arms was on there, and there were so many just hit songs on that album. Of course, this is the one where Jonathan Cain joined the band. And it's just, so there's this great article that I wanted to share with you, and it's called Journey Gets Ahead Rehashing Formula for Rock and Roll. And a lot of these articles are not really positive toward the artist. And this is another one that just, it's got that little bit of a negative spin to it. And it's just interesting, again, with the hindsight, after all this time, to see what was being said back then and then how it ended up playing out. So I'm going to read this to you. I think you'll enjoy this. So Journey Gets Ahead Rehashing Formula for Rock and Roll by Rick Nelson, who's a Herald special writer. All right. Journey, the band that has sold out Coliseum concerts Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, ought to be written up in textbooks and studied as an example of how to get the most mileage out of the fewest original musical ideas. That's a great cut. And I don't even know what to say about that. Because I don't know that I would have ever thought of Journey that way, especially because when the guys that started the band, when you go back to Neil Sean, I don't know how to say his name, and Greg Raleigh, who both came from Santana. That's how the band started, because both these guys were just great musicians. And they really did. I don't know. You go back to that early Journey stuff, not the early stuff before Steve Perry, but after Steve Perry joined and they started taking off, I don't know. I don't know that it all felt so rehashed. There was a lot of it felt really fresh. Anyway, I loved their stuff, and I'm not sure that that's fair. Hey, hold on for just a second. We'll get right back to the video. But if you like this stuff, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave any comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we really, really appreciate it. Anyway, with that, back to the video. Saying get the most mileage out of the fewest original musical ideas. Anyway, especially when you consider that this is when Escape came out. Because they actually did Open Arms, which was on Escape. That was when he says fewest original musical ideas, maybe that wasn't an original idea. I think it was. I mean, that really kind of introduced the power ballad to the world. Nothing like that not only had ever happened on a Journey album, but there weren't a lot of examples of that kind of a thing in popular music, at least that way, again, the power ballad. All right. Ever since lead singer Steve Perry joined the band in '78, Journey has managed to come up with a hook-filled hit or two, and then filled out their albums with a blatant rehash of standard rock and roll frills. The band's former keyboard player, Greg Raleigh, once dismissed such criticism by saying, "You can never jump too far ahead of your audience," which is actually, a fairly wise thing in the world of popular music, generally speaking. But, we did a video yesterday on Steely Dan, and those guys talk about their musical direction was very, very cerebral. I mean, they were jazz influenced, and the way they put their music together was, in some ways, they were playing to a really, really sophisticated audience ultimately, but it just was so good that everybody loved it. So there's wisdom in what Greg says there, but it is possible to make some really, really cerebral, again, music and have an impact on wider culture like Steely Dan did. And that's actually when they started the band Journey, they were more of a fusion progressive rock type band. And so it did seem that when Steve Perry joined, they did kind of step back a little bit and try to get a little bit more. And I think, what was his name? Herbie Herbert was their manager. I think that's who it was. They may even. They do mention him in the next paragraph because he's the one that actually brought Steve Perry in. Okay, but let's keep going. Looking through the other end of the telescope, one is reminded of the saying that no one ever went broke underestimating the taste of the American public. Okay. Raleigh was helping his father run a restaurant in Seattle when manager Herbie Herbert called him in '73 about joining a new group. Herbert also recruited guitarist Neil Schon, who had been only 15 when he began playing with Raleigh and Santana. A lot of people, I don't know how many people actually know that. Again, Journey was a spin-off band from Santana. And Neil Schon was a kid. And if you can actually see him in some old Santana stuff, and he's just this kid with that big fro that he became famous for later. Let's see, Herbie recruited guitarist. They both left the group after Carlos Santana's interest in music turned to spiritualism. Rounding out the group were Ross Valerie, who'd been playing with Steve Miller, and veteran drummer Ainsley Dunbar, presently with Jefferson Starship. At first, the group was a jam-oriented progressive rock band like so many others in the early 70s, like I was saying a second ago. None of them sang very well. Raleigh had apparently blown his voice sometime after recording Black Magic Woman with Santana. Now that's also an interesting thing. I don't know that a lot of people know. Journey, of course, like I said, was a spin-off band from Santana, and it was started by Neil and Greg. And Greg Raleigh, had actually sang in Santana along with playing the keyboards in the song Black Magic Woman. Got a Black Magic Woman. The Santana version, Greg Raleigh actually sings that. And I don't, I'll tell you something. I love Greg Raleigh, hyper talented guy, good songwriter, great keyboard player, obviously. But he didn't, I don't know. I never loved his voice. It was very, very smooth and it sounded fine. But there was a reason that when Steve Perry came into that band, that he became such a superstar in that group. Because they're just because you can carry a tune doesn't mean you have a good voice. And Greg Raleigh had his voice was fine, but it didn't have that spectacular X factor the way Steve Perry's did. So anyway, like it says here, none of them sang very well. And even though Raleigh had been a lead singer, this guy's making some comment about blowing his voice out after Black Magic Woman. I don't know. But anyway, either way, I don't know that Greg Raleigh's voice ever was just as good as Steve Perry's. Steve Perry just had that unique thing. Okay, Herbert took charge, changed the group's sound and stage look, arranged for voice lessons, and brought in lead singer Robert Fleischman. Herbert soon dumped Fleischman for Steve Perry. And there's all kinds of, you can go listen to stories where people talk about the moment that he brought in the demo tape of Steve Perry and played it for the guys and said, this is going to be your new lead singer. And they were very hesitant. None of them really wanted Steve Perry in the band. And then Steve Perry comes in, joins the band. Greg Raleigh leaves after a few albums. And then Jonathan Cain comes in, who's with the Babies. And then when Steve Perry actually when he becomes aware that the reason Journey is becoming so successful is because of Steve Perry, then he and Jonathan Cain kind of take over the band. Neil Schon gets kind of pushed out of the way, not out of the band, because he's still in the band today. Kind of gets pushed out of the way, and then Steve and Jonathan Cain kind of take over the group, and then, of course, Frontiers comes out, and then by the time Raised on Radio comes out, they've kicked Steve Smith and Ross Valerie out of the band because they're just going crazy with it, taking over everything, which was kind of an unfortunate thing. But all right, getting back to the article. The result, with a lot of help from arranger and producer Roy Thomas Baker, was the hit album Infinity and 2 singles. Ironically, Wheel in the Sky, which had 8 weeks on the singles charts, was co-written by Fleischman. Despite complaints that Journey was playing, quote, wimp rock, the band was off and running. One critic said their music, quote, is for people who take Quaaludes. Journey has made a pile playing formula rock. enough to feel casual about giving CBS salespeople and radio stations $100 copies of gold and platinum albums and $110 satin tour jackets. The money continues to roll in thanks to Journey's hot-selling Escape album and the group's rigorous touring schedule. And that's what I was saying here, that Escape, and this is in the early days, not long after Escape came out. I mean, who would have known what an impact that album would have on pop culture, on the 80s, and then pop culture even today. I was singing in a band years ago, a wedding group. And it was funny. This would have been 15 years ago, and you're talking about 30 years after Escape came out. And we would play Don't Stop Believin', and it was amazing. Every time we'd play that song, and here's me, I'm 40 plus years old, but we're playing this song to people in the early 20s back in 2010-ish. I don't remember what years these were when I was doing that, but that song, I think largely because it's the Sopranos, but everybody knows the song. It has become part of our culture, the song Don't Stop Believin'. And who would have known, again, back then when this was being written, how that song would have such an impact. And then Open Arms also, on that same album, Escape, some people credit that song, Open Arms, on Escape, with being the thing that started the whole idea of the power ballad. So this album just had this massive impact on pop culture, especially the world of music. Okay, Raleigh, after 12 years of touring and recording with Santana and Journey, has left the group for a solo career, which of course didn't do much, obviously. He has been replaced by John Cain, formerly with the Babies. Though band members have talked up Cain's arrival as, quote, new blood, Escape doesn't stray from the pattern of Journey's success. And I don't know that I really completely agree with that, but I understand what they're saying. About the most noticeable change is that after years of having pulled off a pose as a heavy metal band, Journey is a little more open about the easy listening aspect of the music. And I don't get that statement at all, except for the point about the aspect of easy listening music, because like I said a second ago, Open Arms, which if you don't know the story behind that, Jonathan Cain, who had just recently joined the band, had written the song Open Arms and had intended it for the Babies, but John Waite didn't like it. And is that his John Waite? Yeah. I get these names mixed up sometimes. Of the Babies, the singer didn't like it. And so they ended up, he was playing it one day. Steve Perry heard him playing this little ditty on the piano and says, "What is that?" And Jonathan Cain said, "It's just a song I wanted to play with the Babies, but they didn't like it." And Steve Perry says, "Well, that's their loss. We're going to do it." So they recorded Open Arms. He and Jonathan Cain kind of finished it up. And they didn't have a lot of hopes for that song. Neil Schon didn't want it on the album. Matter of fact, I don't know that anybody else besides those two wanted it on the album because it was so different, because it was such a radical departure, which makes this statement so interesting, because that song alone was such a radical departure from everything they had done prior to this. And the other guys in the band didn't want to do it. And as a matter of fact, didn't want to do it so much, it ended up as the last song on side 2 of the album. They were burying that thing. And interestingly, at least for a time, that became their biggest hit. So again, it's interesting going back and looking at what these people were saying about this, because it just wasn't, in the end, it just kind of wasn't accurate. Okay, so, and then this whole idea pulled off the pose as a heavy metal band. I don't know that Journey ever saw themselves as a heavy metal band. I mean, they had the song Open Arms was on the soundtrack of the movie Heavy Metal. I think that's the closest they would have ever come to being put in that category. I mean, just the fact they mentioned the song Will in the Sky a minute ago, there's nothing heavy metal, in my opinion, about that. Anything that they'd done that I would put in that category. And maybe I'm totally clueless for saying this, but I'm a pretty big Journey fan and heavy metal fan, and I don't get that statement at all. Okay. I think this album will appeal to a wider spectrum of fans, is Schoen's official word on the subject. And he was right about that. Because Escape is the thing that made them superstars, really put them over the top. Though Dunbar was replaced by drummer Steve Smith and might be open to accusations of sour grapes, he summed up a lot of the criticism of Journey when he left the band. Quote, "They kept getting more formulated," Dunbar said. "Note for note, every night. Everybody says, that's a tight band. It's tight because it doesn't do anything." Okay. Then the rest of the article's here on the next page. And the next page, group plays tight rock to get ahead. And there's always some truth to that. The simpler the music it is, the easier it is to kind of keep it tight and keep it together. So that can be a fair criticism in some ways. But Dunbar's wrong in saying Journey doesn't do anything. Every night, the band is ready, willing, and able to use every corny trick and trite musical device in the book. So there's a little knock on the band there. They may never get ahead of their audience, as Raleigh said, but they are certainly getting ahead. One report from Los Angeles, where Journey recently played, is that the band is cranking it out at top volume. Hearing protectors would be a sound oops investment for those attending the shows at the Coliseum. So Journey, of course, is really, really loud. So, and this is always interesting to see things like this. So here's a photo of the band in the newspaper. And what's interesting about it is, and you'll if you know who the band is and you can name the members, this is the part that you'll find interesting when you look at the bottom and you see the list of who it is. And it says Journey members clockwise from top: Steve Smith, okay, that's Steve Smith, Neil Schoen, that's right, Steve Perry, Greg Raleigh, right there, not Greg Raleigh, that's Jonathan Cain, and then of course Ross Valerie right there. So it's kind of fun to see the review that these people had about it, and the little bit of cluelessness that the editors put into this by not even getting the names right in the photograph, even after mentioning them in the article, but somebody else was probably in charge of the photograph. But anyway, I find these things interesting. Again, we're looking back decades later to what people were saying about this album, this one that we're talking about today, but so many of these groups and these albums that ended up going on to have impact the world in ways that these people couldn't even imagine. We couldn't have imagined at the time that when Escape came out, that it would take on the life that it did. And that in some ways, Greg Raleigh leaving the band Journey and then Jonathan Cain coming in, and the two of them combining songwriting forces the way they did, that in some ways you could argue would lead to the demise of the group. The success would go to their heads in such a way, and it kind of seems that's what happened. Steve Perry was just enormous, and he's the one that made Journey just take off. And then, of course, in the middle of Journey being huge, he goes off and does his own solo album, which sounds just like Journey, and has this hit song "Oh Sherry," which was just huge. And Steve Perry becomes this voice of a generation almost, in a way. And he's still, just hearing that voice is so amazing. Anyway, hope you find this stuff interesting. Of course, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share any thoughts. If you like Journey, if you were into this stuff, we'd love to hear from you. And so, of course, with that, again, have yourself a fantastic day.